Good afternoon to all of you in Singapore. Sorry I can't be there in person. Before I get on to the original planned content of my talk, events rather got ahead of me, and how I had originally planned to use my time here. Plans have had to change a bit, but I have an important announcement, and then there's a slightly compressed version of what I had originally planned to say. So the big announcement is that we are holding a new election to the Scheme Steering Committee. The process for this will start now. In order to avoid important election dates falling during the winter holiday season, we're going to have a very long, or fairly long, registration and nomination period, and then there will be a result in February. So the first question you may ask is, why are we doing this? The working group that I chair asked for a new steering committee because the current outgoing steering committee had essentially got out of practice at being a steering committee. It fell dormant for a very long time and was no longer able to meet regularly and make the decisions that we as a working group really needed from it. If you know Scheme, there's probably some names you recognise here among people who've been on the steering committee so far. Guy Steele was on the first one with Borden and Wand. Steele invented Scheme with Sussman. Feely created Gambit. Klinger edited the reports between the R2RS and the R5RS, and quite a bit of R6RS. This current steering committee with Feely, Rees, Klinger, Hansen, and Shivers started in 2009, oversaw the R7 small report, but after that was ratified, sort of, as mentioned, fell dormant until my predecessor as chair of the working group, John Cowan, resigned, and they had to become active, and for some reason they appointed me in his place. So for 2026 onwards, we will have a new one. What is the steering committee? The steering committee sets the ground rules for us as the working group. It decides roughly what the report would look like, sets some basic requirements and goals. They give me advice, and indirectly the rest of the working group advice. They appointed me, as mentioned, and they can dismiss me. They enforce the code of conduct of the working group. They run and own some of the digital infrastructure that we as schemers depend on as a community. They organize the ratification of the report when the working group is done. And when the working group is done, perhaps most importantly, they decide what happens next. When my job is done, when R7 Large is done and dusted, they will still be around and they will decide how to continue. So, to find out more, to register to vote and to nominate candidates, you can go to this address. It's r7rs.org/sc. That's r7rs.org/s for steering, C for committee. As mentioned, voter registration and nominations are open now until the 15th of January. We will have voting in the first 2 weeks of January, and then there will be a result shortly thereafter. Okay, so important announcement out of the way. Now to, as promised, the slightly compressed, originally planned content of my talk. My name is Daphne Preston-Kendal. I am, as mentioned, the chair of the working group, which has been entrusted with the next revision of the Scheme report. And I would like to deal with the question in this talk of what does a good Scheme report look like in 2025? How is it different from maybe 1975 or other times when people have been making the Scheme report? And I would also like to invite you all and the Scheme community as a whole to a discussion about these questions and see if you think I'm right or not. So as creators of the Scheme report, like creators of any text, we need to ask, who are we creating it for? We need to think in terms of a real audience. Who are they? Who are they? How are they using Scheme? How are they using the specification? And what do they want? And what do they need in order to do their thing? So you can think in terms of vague constituencies. These are never going to be like any grouping of a diverse, like any subgrouping of a diverse group, like all schemers. Not everyone in every constituency will always think the same, but a very basic one is implementers who want something they can actually write a good compiler for, versus users who quite often just want their pet features added. So there's different pressures there. But in some cases, the interests of implementers and users are aligned, like in embedded use, where both sides really want a small memory use and suitability for resource-limited environments. Another pair of constituencies that are kind of in tension with one another is users in education. You can read the papers about the creation of the textbook How to Design Programs for very interesting reports on the specific needs of a student, of a good student language. And on the other hand, there's those who have been scheming for a very long time, which these days is mostly hobbyists, but also some professionals. With Scheme, though, often we are thinking about more explicitly political constituencies in the sense not of the political parties that we have in our everyday politics, but different ideas of what Scheme is as a language, different ideas of what Scheme should become based on the idea of what is its essential essence. Here's one constituency. The idea that the R6RS and our work on the R7RS large language is a kind of a goal to create a big scheme against a little scheme party is one that is sometimes being accused by others of kind of sacrificing this smaller nature. You find this kind of wording, a diamond-like jewel, in lots of places, criticizing the R6RS, criticizing us, the R7 large working group. This particular formulation of words is from Nick Gabriel's Worse is Better essay, which is probably where the metaphor originated. And it seems that just as physics and geochemistry put limits on how big a diamond can be, and our aesthetics as humans limit how big we can make it as jewelry, just in that way, it seems from the objections to the R6RS and to the objections to what we're doing, that there may be limits to how big Scheme can get and still be this diamond-like jewel. On the subject of this kind of big and small language tension, I would like to call back to Guy Steele's 1998 Oopsla talk, Growing a Language. If you don't know it, I very much recommend reading it or listening to it. But he actually talks about Scheme in this talk. And I would just like to read briefly what he says. He asks, could not the right thing be a small language, not hard to port, but with no warts? I guess it could be done, but I, for one, am not that smart, or have not had that much luck. But in fact, I think it cannot be done. 5 and 20 years ago, when users did not want that much from a programming language, one could try. Scheme was my best shot at it. But users will not now, with glad cries, glom onto a language that gives them no more than what Scheme or Pascal gave them. So there is a reason, if you're not familiar with this paper, there's a reason for his slightly strange mode of expression there. But he's talking about how user expectations, user requirements from a language have grown over time. And in particular, in 1998, he talked about wanting to make graphical interfaces, to do networking and talk to remote APIs, to hot load code into a running program, to do multi-threading, multi-processing, and have distributed systems, and to have multilingual text. From these, one notices very much that Steele was talking about Java in 1998. Some of these things are now out of fashion. Some were thought of as good ideas at the time, but are now seen as bad ideas. Some of them never caught on. But some are just as important as ever. But even those which are as important as ever, sometimes no longer seem like things that a language should have to take care of, but rather the province of third-party libraries. Indeed, Steele actually concludes growing a language in favor of letting users grow a language by libraries. But he says a too minimal base, like that of 1975 Scheme or even 1998 Scheme, is not enough. Now, originally I had planned a little audience participation round here, but I don't have time after the announcement, so I will just simply summarize my own answer, which is both yes and no. That Steele is basically right, that growing a language is good, but that Scheme in 1975 lacked important features. What people object to is generally not bigness per se, but where the bigness comes from. If they make the language big themselves, very few object to this. If the report itself is 1,000 pages long, this tends to be a cause for concern in some quarters. Our disagreements are over how to grow the language, not over that it should be grown or growable. What about another political division? I want to talk about another paper called The Structure of Programming Language Revolution, also by Dick Gabriel. Gabriel talks about taking a break from programming languages in the early 90s to do a fine arts degree. When he returned in the late 90s, the scene had completely changed. People used to talk about dynamic evolving systems like Common Lisp and Smalltalk. But by the end of the 1990s, they were talking about static languages like Haskell. I hypothesized that the Scheme world lived through this transition, but without really noticing it as a community. This is one of the reasons for the divisions which arose immediately after this paradigm shift. Some members of the community adopted the new paradigm, and others preferred to stay with the old. And the two sides fundamentally do not understand one another and each other's concerns. The dynamic systems approach is epitomized by the R5RS, which only has an interactive top level. It even added the beginnings of a namespace system that was based on first-class environments and the eval procedure. Implementations which follow this model include Guile and MIT Scheme. The static languages approach, on the other hand, is epitomized by the R6RS, which has no standard interactive top level. Its implementations include Racket, Loco, and Shea Scheme, but also, in the most extreme cases, niche implementations which have no interactive mode at all. Put briefly, dynamic languages people see Scheme simply as a dynamic language. The static languages people see Scheme as a static language in all regards except for its type system. This appears to be a fundamental difference in beliefs about which primitives to use, what Scheme fundamentally is as a language, and therefore what the right abstractions to build are, and how the Scheme report should look in the future. So I've mentioned just two kind of dimensions of disagreement here, but already if I plot them on a table, and compare similar languages that people might like to use as models for what Scheme should be like in the future, we see a huge range of expectations. Except for maybe Lua, I've seen appeals to all of the languages that are on screen now as examples for how schemes should be in the future. Lua, those who want a little dynamic language tend to appeal to earlier versions of the report rather than to another language. And these, I emphasize again, are only two dimensions of disagreement. I could add even more axes for philosophical agreements, for even more of them, disagreements about procedure, how we should make the report, and even more for individual specific features. Given all of these divisions that seem to be so fundamental, one natural question is whether it still makes sense to make a Scheme report. And one possible answer is no. Some already answered during the R6RS days and in the R7 small days that Scheme standardization would stop. So just as Racket has no longer claims to be a Scheme report implementation in its default mode, other schemes would slowly diverge from the report and from one another. Guile would no longer be Guile Scheme one day, but simply Guile. Chicken Scheme would simply be Chicken. Like the many descendants of Algol 60 and 68, and the many dialects of those descendants, the languages would eventually evolve to have a common ancestor, strongly recognizable in each of them, but each distinct and, importantly, incompatible. It shouldn't surprise you that I do not think that this is the way to go. I still want to be able to solve the problems I perceive in the common base of all of these languages, and I want to make my solutions available to as many schemas as possible in one go. And I emphasize that I want to do this as a user of Scheme, not as a committee member. I want to do it through libraries, not by creating a 1,000-page Scheme report. Racket is also an excellent example of the problems that could arise if we were to abandon standardization. Racket has some great features, but they are not available to other users of other implementations because Racket's own implementations of them are not portable. The same problem applies even in implementations which haven't gone quite as far as Racket. Guile users use Guile's own implementation-specific module declaration, so their code is often unavailable on other implementations. There's a lot of Guile code out there which I want to use on Shea or Chibi, but porting work is required even if the actual code content of the library only uses standard Scheme features. If you notice then that this is more or less the same rationale for Scheme reports that there has always been, and I believe it still applies. The question then is reunifying not only implementations, but also the reports which have become emblematic of the splits in our community. While to some extent the R6RS editors and community are justified in feeling that R7RS Small abandoned their work, in fact, in many respects, the R7 Small report vindicates the R6RS's decisions. This is because the committee, although they may have set out in another direction, fumbled their way to an important realization, which I'll get to in the next slide. The idea that R7 vindicates R6 may seem like a shocking claim about this division, since many have said it would threaten to kill our community. Fundamentally, though, both reports versions agree on a static semantic for libraries. R7 library declarations, although they involve conditional compilation and other features not supported by R6, define basically the same model. It is true enough that these complex R7 library declarations can be compiled ahead of time to R6 ones, and in fact there is already a program which does this, acru. R7 Small also adopts many of the criticized features of the R6RS, byte vectors for binary data, Unicode for strings. Can you believe that people really resisted that 18 years ago? And has the same exception raising and handling mechanism. The realization that the R7 Small committee fumbled its way towards is that the report is a minimum and not a maximum for implementations. Just because the report is small does not mean that an implementation cannot be big. Just because the report is static does not mean that an implementation cannot be dynamic. The small and large report split helps even more by setting two different minimums according to different requirements of implementations. Moreover, the practical needs of programmers have evolved over time, such that little and big mean different things than they did 25 years ago. Byte vectors were likely uncontroversial in R7RS Small because by the time it came out, programmers had become used to their appearance in languages such as Python 3 and JavaScript. Unicode likewise. There is also culturally much wider acceptance now among programmers of the need for safety, another controversial feature of the R6RS. So this is my appeal to the Scheme community. If we do not have a report in which the vast majority of implementers and users will tolerate, Scheme will simply die as if we had no report at all. Not all of the implementations on screen would die, and I would probably guess which ones would and wouldn't survive, but even those which did survive would be weaker for being unable to take advantage of libraries written for the others. But, I emphasize, joining means compromising. Nobody will look at any Scheme report and say that it is perfect. Even if it were a perfect diamond-like jewel for one person, it can't be all things to all people. Perfection means different things to different people. Scheme has historically been too shy of compromise. This uncompromising pursuit of perfection, even though nobody will ever agree on it, it may be why we have struggled so much to move onwards as a community, while other languages have not. To that end, I would just like to quote my predecessor John Cowan. This is something he said when he voted in favour of R6RS ratification. He said that a well-crafted compromise is, in my opinion, the most sacred thing that a secular age knows. If we cannot have a diamond-like jewel, we can at least have the most sacred thing that a secular age knows. Well, that concludes the philosophical part of my talk. I would just like to move briefly now to the progress report that I think most of you probably more expected. We are working on the R7RS large foundations, that is the core semantics. The procedural fascicle will be out in a few weeks, I hope, or it's called procedural, but it's mostly syntax, but for procedural programming, so things like lambda, let, and con, and so on. As you can imagine, it will be a fairly conservative extension of what we've already had in previous Scheme reports. And there will also be a second draft of the previous fascicle, which I expect will mostly be minor editorial fixes. There may be some small technical changes, but I don't expect so. If you want to find out more, if you want to find out what we're thinking about a specific issue, you can go to our repository and issue tracker. You can give us your feedback on an issue that's important to you, and you can even join the working group. We're still welcoming new members, and we meet once every fortnight, every 2 weeks. And just to finish up, for anyone who may have entered the session late, I would just like to finish with another short notice about the election. We are holding an election to the Scheme Steering Committee. You can find out more at this web address. And if you have any questions for me, if you want to tell me how right I am, how wrong I am, give your opinion on how the scheme report should look, I am on the Discord. Arthur Gleckler should be in the room and should be able to take questions about R7OS progress and about the election as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daphne. So, shall we take?
I don't believe we have time for live questions.
Oh, but we do need to like switch. Yeah, you can connect and then while doing that.
Do we have time for questions? Oh, okay. So this is a question really from outside the Scheme community.
Okay.
Building a standard like R7OS is a lot of work, and that's what you've been reflecting. And so my question, in terms of the cycles the community spends, what do you think the sort of cost-benefit trade-off is? And I ask because in the Haskell community, essentially, what it amounts to is we've given up, right? We no longer produce a new report about Haskell every few years because it's just been too much work and nobody's been willing to sign up for it. But somehow you guys have continued to invest that effort. I'm just interested in the sort of the costs that you incur and benefits you think you get from it.
Well, I think the main difference between Scheme and Haskell in this regard is that Scheme is still a language of very many implementations. There is still, and I personally hope there will never be an implementation as dominant as GHC is in Haskell. That's not to say that GHC's model or Haskell's model is bad. I think it works very well for you, and I think our model works very well for us. In terms of the cost, I mean, as mentioned, we have had these very significant divisions in the Scheme community about what our report should look like, and that has been reflected in different philosophies that implementations have taken, different implementation strategies. Some have argued that we should give up on ahead of time compilation entirely and go to features that would essentially require the adaptive optimization of a JIT in order to implement efficiently. And more or less, the Scheme report has sort of stayed more towards the ahead of time implementation of that, specifically because you can use these static semantics, as I mentioned, can be incorporated into a dynamic context, but not the other way around. I think I may have got a little off topic at the end there. Have I answered your question?
Good. Thank you so much.
Is there any other question, or are we moving on to the next talk?